My name is Lauren Whitaker. 12 years ago, I married Eric Whitaker, a successful real estate developer here in Seattle. From the outside, our life looked perfect: the big house, the cars, the events downtown. But behind closed doors, it was something else entirely. Eric controlled everything. Every dollar I spent, every friend I saw, even the way I dressed for his business dinners. He called it protecting our future. I called it living in a cage I helped build. Last winter, on the night of our 12th anniversary, he told me we were going for a drive to celebrate. Snow was already falling hard as we left the city. He headed east on I-90 away from Seattle, away from everything familiar, 100 miles from home. In the middle of a blizzard, he pulled over on the side of the highway. The wind howled against the windows. He turned to me and said calmly, "You need a lesson in respect. Get out." I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just looked at him as he waited for me to open the door. Then I watched his taillights disappear into the whiteout. A few minutes later, headlights appeared behind me. A black supercar slowed to a stop. The door opened. If you want to find out what happened next and how one decision changed everything, hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment with "What would you do?" I'll be reading every single one. Let's get into the story. 3 months earlier, the cracks in our daily routine had begun to widen in small but unmistakable ways. Eric started leaving for work before sunrise and returning well after dark, often claiming last-minute client meetings or urgent property inspections across the greater Seattle area. His phone, which used to sit openly on the kitchen counter, now remained locked and turned face down whenever he was home. When I asked simple questions about his day, his responses grew sharp and impatient, as if any curiosity from me was an accusation. I brushed it off at first, telling myself the real estate market in Seattle was more cutthroat than ever, with new developments sprouting up everywhere from Capitol Hill to Bellevue. But the late nights piled up, and the excuses started sounding rehearsed. One quiet afternoon, when Eric was out showing a waterfront condo, I pulled out our joint bank statements that had arrived in the mail. As I sorted through the pages at the kitchen table, several large wire transfers stood out immediately. Amounts ranging from $20,000 to nearly $60,000 moved to accounts with names I had never seen before, labels like vendor reimbursement or development consulting that felt too vague for the scale of our projects. I grabbed a fresh notebook from my desk drawer and began listing every questionable entry with the exact date, amount, and description. I noted how some funds seemed to cycle through multiple small transactions before disappearing entirely. To keep everything secure, I created a hidden folder on my laptop and scanned the documents there instead of leaving paper trails around the house. Over the following days, I cross-referenced the transfers against the legitimate project spreadsheets Eric sometimes left open on his computer. The discrepancies grew clearer with each page. A week after that discovery, I made a decision to see things for myself. On a rainy Saturday morning, I waited until Eric left the house, then followed his black SUV at a safe distance through the wet streets of downtown Seattle. Instead of heading to his main office near Pioneer Square, he pulled into the parking garage of a sleek apartment complex in South Lake Union. I parked across the street and watched from my car as he stepped out and met a woman near the lobby entrance. She had long, dark hair, wore a tailored navy blazer and heels, and carried herself with the confidence of someone used to being in control. They hugged in a way that went far beyond professional courtesy, lingering for several seconds before disappearing inside together. That evening, when Eric returned home acting as if nothing unusual had happened, I checked the calendar on his tablet while he showered. The time slot was listed only as site walkthrough. The woman's face stayed in my mind. Later, when I searched her name through company records I could access, I learned she was Alyssa Lopez, officially listed as Eric's executive assistant for the past 8 months. But the private messages I managed to glimpse on his phone one night when he left it, charging in the living room, revealed something much more personal: flirty exchanges, plans for dinners, and references to weekends away that had nothing to do with selling properties. I never said a word to him about what I saw. Confrontation wasn't the plan. Silence and careful documentation were. I continued my quiet tracking, adding more entries to the notebook each time another unexplained transfer appeared. Some money flowed to shell companies with addresses in Delaware. Others were labeled as marketing expenses, even though no campaigns showed up in the books. To capture more than just financial records, I ordered 2 compact hidden cameras from an online security store that shipped discreetly. One went behind a row of books in our living room bookshelf, positioned to cover the main seating area and hallway. The second I installed carefully in Eric's home office upstairs, tucked inside a decorative box on the shelf above his desk. Both devices streamed clear audio and video straight to a private cloud account that required my fingerprint to access. I tested them multiple times when Eric was away, making sure the angle caught conversations and screen activity without drawing attention. As the weeks passed, Eric's controlling side intensified. He began reviewing every receipt I brought home, questioning even small purchases like coffee or new winter boots. He suggested I stop meeting former colleagues for lunch, saying it was better to focus on family stability during a slow market. His tone carried an edge that made the house feel smaller each day. Meanwhile, the time he spent with Alyssa seemed to increase. I noticed new entries in the bank records, hotel charges in Bellevue, and restaurant tabs that matched dates when he claimed to be working late. By the close of the second month, my notebook held detailed logs spanning dozens of pages, and the hidden cameras had recorded hours of footage showing Eric on calls discussing deals that never appeared in official files. The financial picture was becoming undeniable. Large sums were being siphoned off in patterns that suggested more than simple mismanagement. I understood then that gathering this evidence alone wouldn't be enough for what I needed to do next. I required experts who could turn my raw notes and recordings into something legally airtight. That realization pushed me to take the next step. I reached out to an old college friend I hadn't spoken to in years but knew I could trust completely. Reaching out felt like the only logical next move after weeks of gathering information on my own. I picked up my phone one evening when Eric was still at a supposed late meeting and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. Tyler Donovan answered on the second ring, his voice steady and familiar from years of shared history. We had been close friends since our freshman year at the University of Washington, bonding over tough classes, weekend hikes around the city, and long talks about future careers. Even after we both graduated and built our separate lives in Seattle, the trust between us never faded. I knew his tech consulting firm had grown steadily, handling sensitive client data for major companies in the area, which made him the perfect person to confide in now. Over the course of that nearly hour-long call, I laid out the full picture, the pattern of unexplained late returns, the financial red flags I had spotted, the woman I observed meeting Eric, and my deepening suspicion that the marriage I had invested 12 years in was built on layers of deception. Tyler listened carefully, asking clarifying questions without judgment, and finally offered to rearrange his schedule so we could meet face-to-face the very next morning at a quiet cafe near Pike Place Market where we could speak privately. We arrived early and chose a corner table away from the morning rush. I handed him a secure tablet containing the scanned records I had organized. Tyler studied the information methodically, nodding as he noted the inconsistencies in dates and amounts. He agreed immediately that the matter went beyond what one person could manage alone and suggested bringing in specialists. Without delay, he placed 2 calls from the table. The first connected him with Whitney Morgan, an experienced family law attorney he had collaborated with on several complex cases involving wealthy Seattle professionals. Whitney had a reputation for handling discrete matters with precision and understood the nuances of asset division and evidentiary requirements. The second call went to Jordan Ellis, a forensic accountant specializing in unraveling intricate financial trails within real estate developments and corporate structures across the Pacific Northwest. Both professionals cleared time in their calendars and agreed to join us for an initial discussion at a private conference room in a downtown office building later that week. Our first full team meeting occurred 2 days afterward in a neutral, secure location with no connection to Eric's business circles. Whitney Morgan came prepared with a structured questionnaire, probing gently about the history of our joint finances, property holdings in the Seattle area, and any verbal agreements made during the marriage. She carefully outlined how building a strong paper trail now would protect my position later, emphasizing the importance of timing and completeness rather than hasty decisions. Jordan Ellis arrived with multiple devices and began diving into the flagged transfers right away. He pointed out repeated routing through intermediary accounts that appeared designed to obscure origins, noting how certain amounts aligned with project milestones but lacked corresponding invoices or client approvals. Over the following weeks, we scheduled consistent follow-up sessions, alternating between video calls from secure locations and in-person gatherings when schedules allowed. Jordan methodically constructed layered spreadsheets that mapped cash flows, cross-referenced them against public real estate records, and highlighted anomalies that suggested intentional diversion of funds from legitimate development escrow. Tyler took on a quiet coordinating role throughout this period. He helped establish additional encrypted storage solutions for the expanding collection of materials and provided straightforward guidance on maintaining an ordinary appearance in daily life at home. Eric kept making pointed remarks about household expenses and limiting outside social contacts, framing them as necessary precautions during slower market periods. But I kept my replies brief and continued focusing energy on the coordinated effort. The entire team repeatedly stressed the value of patience combined with meticulous preparation, cautioning that incomplete documentation could undermine any future steps we might need to take. In one extended afternoon session dedicated to deeper review, Jordan's analysis revealed a separate but connected stream of smaller, regular payments directed to an account associated with a family member. The timing of these transfers consistently followed larger inflows from Eric's property deals. Seeing the name linked to the transactions caused an immediate shift in my perspective. Sydney Whitaker, my younger sister, had faced ongoing financial pressures for more than a year, confiding only briefly about credit issues and rising living costs in her Belltown apartment during occasional family conversations. The records now indicated Eric had been channeling money to her privately, creating a situation where loyalty and information appeared to be part of an unspoken arrangement. I requested that Tyler verify these findings through independent channels while ensuring discretion. He conducted further cross-checks and confirmed the links without raising any external alerts. The payments had helped Sydney settle outstanding balances and contributed toward her monthly rent, painting a clearer but more complicated picture of how deeply the financial threads extended into personal relationships. Whitney Morgan observed that such connections could hold significance in legal contexts, depending on future developments, while Jordan continued broadening the overall financial diagram with additional layers of documentation. Those 2 months of structured preparation progressed with steady momentum. We revisited and polished every piece of material, aligned supporting dates with Eric's known business travel patterns across Washington state, and created concise executive summaries formatted for clarity in any formal review setting. Tyler stayed consistently supportive, sharing practical suggestions on digital security measures and ways to preserve emotional boundaries without drawing attention. Whitney mapped out various strategic legal options, always underscoring that thorough groundwork carried greater weight than reactive confrontation. Jordan's compiled reports expanded session by session, exposing recurring patterns that indicated systematic movement of resources away from client-related accounts toward personal benefit. By the conclusion of the full preparation period, which spanned 8 weeks from my initial contact with Tyler, the team had assembled a well-organized, professionally validated collection of materials. Every element was dated, categorized, and supported by expert interpretation. The process brought a sharper awareness of the realities I faced, alongside a quiet, strengthening resolve built from the methodical collaboration. Eric continued operating under the assumption that home life remained unchanged, attending his meetings and maintaining his established patterns without any indication he sensed the activity unfolding across different parts of the city. The evening of our 12th anniversary arrived with a heavy sky over Seattle. I had prepared a simple dinner at home as Eric requested, setting the table with the usual dishes we shared on special occasions. He seemed in a good mood when he walked through the door, commenting on the food and pouring wine for both of us. We ate while he talked about recent property closings and the challenges of the winter market. His tone relaxed in a way I had not heard in months. He raised his glass at one point and mentioned how far we had come together, though the words carried a familiar undercurrent of expectation about how things should continue moving forward. I nodded along, keeping my responses measured and focused on the moment rather than deeper reflections, noting how his compliments felt scripted after so many years of similar evenings. As we finished the meal, snow began falling steadily outside the windows, blanketing the street in a thick white layer that quickly covered the parked cars and sidewalks. Eric glanced at the weather through the glass and suggested we take a drive to celebrate properly, saying a change of scenery would do us good after the long week and that the fresh snow might make the evening feel special in its own way. I agreed without argument, clearing the table quickly and putting on my coat and boots before following him to the garage. He backed the car out carefully as the flakes grew larger and more persistent, the streetlights casting a soft glow on the accumulating cover while he adjusted the seat and mirrors with deliberate movements. He drove east out of the neighborhood, heading toward the interstate as the snowfall grew heavier with each passing mile. The wipers worked steadily against the accumulating flakes while he kept the conversation light, mentioning how 12 years together deserved something memorable, and that getting away from the usual routine could remind us of what mattered most in the relationship. I listened as the city lights gradually faded behind us, the road opening up into longer stretches lined with residential areas giving way to more open terrain. Eric pointed out a few landmarks along the way, his voice steady and confident despite the worsening conditions outside, occasionally glancing over to gauge my reaction to his stories about past deals. The heater kept the interior warm, but the world beyond the windows turned increasingly white and indistinct as we merged onto I-90. We continued along the highway, leaving the denser urban areas behind as the road stretched into darker sections lined with trees and open land, now blanketed in snow. The snow intensified, reducing visibility and forcing slower speeds on the slick pavement that required constant attention. Eric remained calm at the wheel, occasionally commenting on how quiet the highway felt in the storm and how few drivers ventured out in such weather. His hands relaxed on the steering wheel. He adjusted the radio once or twice, landing on a station playing soft music that filled the silence between his remarks about future plans and the importance of staying aligned as a couple. The drive stretched on for nearly an hour and a half, the miles ticking by as the storm showed no signs of easing and the temperature outside continued to drop. Eric maintained his composure, sharing more thoughts about the real estate market and how certain clients demanded perfection in every detail. I kept my own comments minimal, watching the white landscape blur past while the car pushed forward into increasingly remote territory. Eventually, he slowed the car and pulled onto the shoulder at a remote section far from any exits or services, the nearest lights distant and faint through the heavy veil of snow. The wind howled around the vehicle, rocking it slightly, and the headlights barely cut through the dense whiteout conditions. Snow piled quickly on the hood and windshield as he shifted into park and turned to face me directly. His expression stayed even as he spoke the words clearly and without raising his voice. "You need a lesson in respect," he said. "Get out of the car and think about how you've been acting lately, how you question things that don't concern you." The statement landed with deliberate weight, leaving little room for discussion in that confined space filled with the sound of the idling engine. I looked at him for a long moment without responding, taking in the seriousness in his eyes and the complete absence of hesitation or second thoughts. Then I reached for the door handle. The cold air rushed in immediately as the door opened, carrying sharp flakes that stung against my face and hands with biting intensity. I stepped onto the snowy ground beside the highway, my shoes sinking several inches into the fresh accumulation that had already built up along the shoulder. The wind cut through my coat with unexpected force, and the temperature felt far lower than it had inside the vehicle, the exposure hitting instantly. Eric waited only a few seconds, his hands resting on the steering wheel as he watched me stand there in the swirling snow. He did not say anything more before putting the car back into drive. He accelerated away smoothly, the taillights glowing red for a brief distance before fading quickly into the swirling snow and darkness ahead. I stood motionless on the shoulder, watching until the red glow disappeared completely and the sound of the engine was swallowed entirely by the storm. The isolation settled in rapidly, with no other vehicles visible in either direction for a long stretch of the empty highway. The wind pushed hard against me, whipping snow into my hair and eyes as the cold deepened in the exposed location, 100 miles from home. I remained there for several minutes, the silence broken only by the constant howl of the wind and the soft settling of new flakes accumulating around my feet. My mind processed the quiet that followed his departure, the reality of the empty highway stretching endlessly in both directions under the heavy blanket of white. No headlights approached during those initial moments, leaving the scene wrapped in a heavy, unbroken whiteness that seemed to stretch on forever. The evening of our 12th anniversary arrived with a heavy sky over Seattle. I had prepared a simple dinner at home as Eric requested, and setting the table with the usual dishes we shared on special occasions. He seemed in a good mood when he walked through the door, commenting on the food and pouring wine for both of us. We ate while he talked about recent property closings and the challenges of the winter market. His tone relaxed in a way I had not heard in months. He raised his glass at one point and mentioned how far we had come together, though the words carried a familiar undercurrent of expectation about how things should continue moving forward in the years ahead. I nodded along, keeping my responses measured and focused on the moment rather than deeper reflections, noting internally how his compliments felt scripted after so many years of similar evenings at the same table. As we finished the meal, snow began falling steadily outside the windows, blanketing the street in a thick white layer that quickly covered the parked cars and sidewalks in our quiet neighborhood. Eric glanced at the weather through the glass and suggested we take a drive to celebrate properly, saying a change of scenery would do us good after the long week and that the fresh snow might make the evening feel special in its own quiet way. I agreed without argument, clearing the table quickly and putting on my coat and boots before following him to the garage where the car waited. He backed the car out carefully as the flakes grew larger and more persistent, the streetlights casting a soft glow on the accumulating cover while he adjusted the seat and mirrors with deliberate movements. He drove east out of the neighborhood, heading toward the interstate as the snowfall grew heavier with each passing mile. The wipers worked steadily against the accumulating flakes while he kept the conversation light, mentioning how 12 years together deserved something memorable and that getting away from the usual routine could remind us of what mattered most in the relationship we had built. I listened as the city lights gradually faded behind us, the road opening up into longer stretches lined with residential areas giving way to more open terrain dotted with occasional businesses. Eric pointed out a few landmarks along the way, his voice steady and confident despite the worsening conditions outside, occasionally glancing over to gauge my reaction to his stories about past deals that had shaped his career. The heater kept the interior warm and comfortable, but the world beyond the windows turned increasingly white and indistinct as we merged onto I-90. We continued along the highway, leaving the denser urban areas behind as the road stretched into darker sections lined with trees and open land now blanketed in snow. The snow intensified, reducing visibility and forcing slower speeds on the slick pavement that required constant attention from the driver. Eric remained calm at the wheel, occasionally commenting on how quiet the highway felt in the storm and how few drivers ventured out in such weather. His hands relaxed on the steering wheel as he navigated the conditions. He adjusted the radio once or twice, landing on a station playing soft music that filled the silence between his remarks about future plans and the importance of staying aligned as a couple through every season. The drive stretched on for nearly an hour and a half, the miles ticking by steadily as the storm showed no signs of easing and the temperature outside continued to drop noticeably. Eric maintained his composure throughout, sharing more thoughts about the real estate market and how certain clients demanded perfection in every detail of their investments. I kept my own comments minimal, watching the white landscape blur past the windows while the car pushed forward into increasingly remote territory where signs of civilization grew sparse. Eventually, he slowed the car and pulled onto the shoulder at a remote section far from any exits or services, the nearest lights distant and faint through the heavy veil of snow. The wind howled around the vehicle, rocking it slightly with each gust, and the headlights barely cut through the dense whiteout conditions that surrounded us. Snow piled quickly on the hood and windshield as he shifted into park and turned to face me directly. His expression stayed even as he spoke the words clearly and without raising his voice. "You need a lesson in respect," he said. "Get out of the car and think about how you've been acting lately, how you question things that don't concern you and fail to show the appreciation I deserve." The statement landed with deliberate weight, leaving little room for discussion in that confined space filled with the low hum of the idling engine. I looked at him for a long moment without responding, taking in the seriousness in his eyes and the complete absence of hesitation or second thoughts in his posture. Then I reached for the door handle. The cold air rushed in immediately as the door opened, carrying sharp flakes that stung against my face and hands with biting intensity. I stepped onto the snowy ground beside the highway, my shoes sinking several inches into the fresh accumulation that had already built up along the shoulder. The wind cut through my coat with unexpected force, and the temperature felt far lower than it had inside the vehicle, the exposure hitting instantly and making every breath visible in the air. Eric waited only a few seconds, his hands resting on the steering wheel as he watched me stand there in the swirling snow without any sign of changing his mind. He did not say anything more before putting the car back into drive. He accelerated away smoothly, the taillights glowing red for a brief distance before fading quickly into the swirling snow and darkness ahead. I stood motionless on the shoulder, watching until the red glow disappeared completely and the sound of the engine was swallowed entirely by the storm. The isolation settled in rapidly, with no other vehicles visible in either direction for a long stretch of the empty highway. The wind pushed hard against me, whipping snow into my hair and eyes as the cold deepened in the exposed location 100 miles from home. I remained there for several minutes, the silence broken only by the constant howl of the wind and the soft settling of new flakes accumulating around my feet. My mind processed the quiet that followed his departure, the reality of the empty highway stretching endlessly in both directions under the heavy blanket of white. No headlights approached during those initial moments, leaving the scene wrapped in a heavy, unbroken whiteness that seemed to stretch on forever in every direction. A few minutes later, a new set of headlights appeared through the blizzard. The black supercar slowed to a stop beside me on the shoulder of I-90. Tyler Donovan stepped out from the driver's side, his movements deliberate and calm despite the driving snow. He had been my closest friend since our freshman year at the University of Washington, the one person I had confided in completely during the long months of careful preparation. He carried a thick thermal blanket and a thermos of hot coffee, wrapping the blanket around my shoulders immediately and pressing the warm drink into my hands without needing to ask for explanations in that moment. I climbed into the passenger seat, the heated leather interior providing an instant contrast to the freezing wind that had cut through my clothes on the highway. Tyler got back behind the wheel and pulled away smoothly, navigating the slick road with practiced control as the supercar's powerful lights cut through the heavy snowfall. He kept his eyes focused on the road ahead, the wipers maintaining a steady rhythm while the engine hummed with quiet power. For the first several miles he remained silent, giving me space to sip the coffee and feel the warmth gradually return to my fingers and face as the vehicle gained speed. Once we had put a safe distance from the remote stretch where I had been left standing, Tyler spoke in a low, steady voice that carried no panic. He confirmed that he had positioned himself at a calculated distance after receiving my earlier signal, ready to move the moment the situation developed on the highway. He explained how the supercar allowed him to monitor without being noticed, and that the timing aligned precisely with the contingency we had discussed in our last secure conversation weeks earlier. His presence brought an immediate wave of relief, grounded not in dramatic gestures but in the simple reliability of someone who had committed to being there exactly when needed. We drove westbound back toward Seattle for nearly an hour, the storm slowly thinning as we approached the outer edges of the city. Tyler deliberately chose secondary routes that avoided the main corridors where Eric might travel, sticking to less traveled roads that wound through quieter suburbs before connecting back to familiar areas. He had already secured a quiet hotel room under a neutral name in advance, ensuring both privacy and immediate access to basic amenities without raising any flags. When we finally arrived at the hotel on the outskirts, he parked the supercar in a covered garage spot and escorted me inside, still carrying the blanket and thermos as a practical measure against the lingering cold. In the warmly lit hotel room, Tyler set up his laptop on the small desk and opened a secure encrypted folder containing the materials we had assembled over the previous months. He showed me the organized timelines, cross-referenced financial records, and professional summaries that transformed individual pieces of information into a cohesive and structured package. He pointed out specific sections that Whitney Morgan and Jordan Ellis had refined during our joint sessions, highlighting how the different elements now connected to form a clear and defensible picture that could support further actions when the time came. Tyler emphasized that the priority in these first hours was to protect the integrity of everything while allowing me to regain physical warmth and mental clarity. We reviewed the files together methodically over the next couple of hours, going through each category with focused attention. Tyler explained the practical implications of various entries in straightforward terms, noting connections between dates and amounts without adding unnecessary emotion or speculation. He had brought additional secure storage devices and walked me through the process of creating backup copies to ensure redundancy and protection against any unexpected loss. His entire approach stayed professional and solution-oriented, offering clear pathways for the immediate days ahead while fully respecting the gravity of the events that had unfolded earlier that evening. As the storm continued to rage outside the window, the hotel room transformed into a temporary operational base for sorting thoughts and planning next steps. Tyler made certain I had access to dry clothes from a bag he had prepared in advance, and arranged for simple hot food through room service to help restore energy levels after the prolonged exposure to the cold. He remained attentive throughout, listening carefully when I shared observations, but never pressing for rushed decisions. Instead, allowing the discussion to develop naturally around the practical realities we now faced. The black supercar rested safely in the garage below, serving as a tangible reminder of how months of quiet coordination had enabled this swift shift from vulnerability to structured support. Tyler provided brief but precise updates on the ongoing coordination with the rest of the team, confirming that both Whitney Morgan and Jordan Ellis remained on standby for the subsequent phase once we determined the optimal timing. He stressed the critical need to maintain everyday appearances in the short term while keeping all collected materials fully secure and inaccessible to outsiders. The hours passed with quiet efficiency as we turned what could have been overwhelming chaos into a controlled and methodical transition forward. By the time midnight approached, we had covered the essential elements and established a clear short-term framework for the coming days. Tyler arranged for additional security protocols at the hotel and prepared to stay in an adjacent room overnight to ensure continued safety. His consistently calm demeanor served as a steady anchor during those first hours, helping convert a moment that might otherwise have felt completely destabilizing into the beginning of a deliberate and empowered response. The supercar and the organized materials together symbolized the culmination of extended quiet effort, finally aligning at precisely the needed moment. In the quiet hotel room, Tyler opened the latest secure file sent by Jordan Ellis earlier that evening. The forensic accountant had compiled an updated package that included several new layers of documentation uncovered during the final review cycle. Tyler navigated to a dedicated section marked with recent timestamps and began walking me through the additional findings one category at a time, explaining each element with clear references to supporting records. The materials revealed connections that extended beyond the financial transfers we had already documented, pointing toward personal relationships that influenced the flow of resources in unexpected directions and added complexity to the overall situation. One particular folder contained records of a young man named Owen Whitaker, listed with an age of 19 and linked through birth documentation and limited public records directly to Eric. The details showed that Owen had been born during the early years of our marriage, with no prior mention in any family discussions or shared documents over the entire 12-year period. Jordan's analysis included cross-referenced addresses in the Seattle area, school records from local institutions, and financial support patterns that suggested ongoing but carefully concealed involvement from Eric spanning nearly 2 decades. Tyler highlighted specific entries that demonstrated how certain payments had been routed through intermediary accounts to maintain separation from official household finances, noting the implications for asset disclosure if legal proceedings advanced at any point. I absorbed the information slowly, processing the reality of a son I had never known existed, and considering how this hidden aspect had operated parallel to our daily life without any visible trace. The discovery added a new dimension to the patterns of concealment that had defined much of the past 12 years, raising questions about other undisclosed elements that might still remain. Tyler remained focused on the practical aspects, explaining how Jordan had verified the connections through multiple independent sources, including official records and transaction histories, to ensure accuracy before including them in the package. He emphasized that this information strengthened the overall picture by demonstrating layers of undisclosed personal circumstances that could significantly affect any division of assets or claims in a formal setting. Further down in the same updated materials, another set of entries drew attention to communications involving my sister. Sydney Whitaker appeared in several referenced interactions, with timestamps aligning precisely to periods when Eric had been particularly insistent on limiting my contact with family members and monitoring my schedule more closely. The records indicated that she had received additional funds beyond the earlier payments we had identified, and that these transfers coincided with instances where private details about my conversations and daily activities had apparently reached Eric through indirect channels that suggested deliberate sharing. Tyler confirmed that Jordan had traced the pattern carefully over several weeks, showing how certain messages and shared information aligned with the timing of the financial support in a consistent manner. The connection suggested a relationship of exchange that had operated quietly for many months, involving family ties in ways that complicated the emotional landscape and created additional vulnerabilities within the family structure. I considered the implications for Sydney's situation, recognizing how ongoing financial pressures could create dependencies that Eric had evidently identified and exploited to his advantage over time. We continued examining the full scope of the new files for the next several hours, cross-checking dates against known events from the past year, and refining the summaries that Whitney Morgan would need for any formal review or presentation. Tyler made detailed notes on key points that required additional verification from Jordan, ensuring nothing was overlooked in the growing collection of materials. His methodical approach helped maintain clarity amid the new revelations, turning potentially overwhelming details into structured components of the larger case and providing a framework for understanding the full extent of the concealed activities. The discovery of Owen Whitaker shifted my understanding of Eric's double life in a profound way, revealing a hidden chapter that had existed parallel to our shared household without any indication in our daily interactions. The involvement indicated by the records with Sydney added another layer of betrayal within family boundaries, highlighting how trust had been leveraged for personal advantage over an extended period, and how financial incentives had influenced relationships in unexpected ways. Tyler kept the discussion grounded firmly in the evidence itself, avoiding emotional interpretations and focusing instead on how these elements could support a comprehensive legal strategy when the appropriate time arrived for next steps. By the early morning hours, we had integrated the new materials into the master folder and created additional secure backups across multiple devices for protection. Tyler outlined the next logical steps for the team, including how Whitney Morgan would incorporate the updated information into her preparation framework and what additional documentation might be requested from Jordan to strengthen specific areas. The hotel room, which had served as a temporary refuge after the events of the evening, had now become the site where the full extent of the concealed realities began to surface clearly in documented and organized form. The next morning arrived with clearer skies over Seattle as we prepared for the scheduled appearance at the federal courthouse downtown. Tyler and I left the hotel early, driving the short distance through streets still showing traces of the previous night's storm. We met Whitney Morgan and Jordan Ellis at a secure side entrance, where the team conducted a final review of logistics and key exhibits before entering the building. The courtroom assigned for the emergency hearing was on the third floor, a formal space with high ceilings, polished wood paneling, and rows of seating that created an atmosphere of structured authority. We took our places at the table designated for our side while Eric arrived shortly after with his own counsel, his expression shifting noticeably upon seeing the full group assembled and the volume of materials prepared on our table. The session began promptly with Whitney Morgan presenting the initial motion for temporary orders based on the compiled evidence. She submitted the organized binder containing time-stamped audio recordings captured from the home office and living area over several months, video segments documenting key conversations, and detailed financial spreadsheets prepared by Jordan Ellis. The judge reviewed the materials methodically as Jordan took the stand to explain the forensic analysis in clear, technical terms. He walked through specific transaction patterns that demonstrated systematic diversion of funds from client escrow accounts into undisclosed channels, using large display charts that highlighted repeated routing through intermediary entities and discrepancies between reported project costs and actual movements. The visual aids made the patterns unmistakable, showing how certain amounts had been redirected consistently over time without corresponding documentation or client approvals. Alyssa Lopez was called next as a witness under subpoena. She entered the courtroom with visible hesitation and her usual professional composure cracking as she was sworn in and took her seat. Under direct questioning from Whitney Morgan, she confirmed her role as executive assistant and acknowledged the personal relationship that had developed with Eric over the past year. She described specific instances where she had been asked to process payments outside standard procedures, provided details about documents she had handled that never appeared in official company records, and recounted conversations in which Eric had directed her to handle certain financial matters discreetly. Her testimony added direct corroboration to the financial patterns, shifting the atmosphere in the room noticeably as Eric's legal team raised repeated objections that were consistently overruled by the judge. The most unexpected moment came when Owen Whitaker was brought in as a supporting witness. The 19-year-old entered the courtroom quietly, dressed in simple clothing, and took the stand after being identified through the records Jordan had uncovered. He spoke in a calm but reserved manner about the financial support he had received over the years and the limited contact maintained with Eric, confirming key details that aligned precisely with the documented transactions without elaborating on personal emotions. His appearance created a visible reaction across the courtroom, particularly at the opposing table, where Eric's posture stiffened noticeably, and his attorney exchanged hurried whispers during the questioning. Eric was given the opportunity to respond through his attorney, who attempted to characterize the financial movements as legitimate business expenses arising from complex deal structures common in real estate development. Eric himself addressed the court in a measured tone, denying any intentional wrongdoing and suggesting that any discrepancies resulted from accounting complexities rather than deliberate actions. However, the combination of audio evidence capturing controlling language and unilateral decisions, the forensic charts showing clear patterns, Alyssa's direct testimony, and Owen's confirmation created a consistent narrative that proved difficult to dismantle under cross-examination. The judge asked pointed questions about specific transfers and the lack of corresponding documentation, pressing for explanations that grew increasingly strained as the session progressed. Throughout the proceedings, Whitney Morgan maintained a calm and professional presentation, referencing the evidence point by point without unnecessary emphasis or drama. Jordan provided additional clarification when requested by the court, reinforcing the technical accuracy of the financial analysis with precise references to the spreadsheets and supporting records. The session extended into the afternoon as various exhibits were examined in detail, with the judge requesting playback of selected audio segments and closer review of highlighted chart entries, each piece built upon the previous one, creating a comprehensive record that left little room for alternative interpretations. As the hearing continued, the weight of the accumulated materials became increasingly evident in the courtroom. The audio recordings played key segments that captured references to financial decisions made without consultation in language that demonstrated patterns of control. The visual evidence and multiple witness statements together painted a picture of systematic activity rather than isolated incidents. Eric's attempts to reframe the narrative met consistent challenges from the documented facts and the corroboration from different sources, including his own former associate and the unexpected witness. By the time the judge called for a brief recess to review the submissions more thoroughly, the foundation for further legal action had been firmly established through the morning's detailed presentations. The team remained composed and focused on the procedural steps ahead, recognizing that this session represented a critical phase in addressing the accumulated issues within the formal legal framework of the federal court. 2 weeks later, the federal courthouse in downtown Seattle once again became the setting for the final hearing that would determine the immediate future. The same courtroom carried a heavier sense of finality as the judge reviewed the complete record from the previous session. Eric sat at the opposing table with his attorney, his posture more subdued than during the initial appearance. Whitney Morgan presented a concise summary of the evidence, reinforcing the key patterns of financial misconduct and the corroborating testimony that had been established. Jordan Ellis provided one final clarification on the scale of the diverted funds when asked by the court, citing the forensic calculations that quantified the impact on client accounts and joint assets over the 12-year period. The judge delivered the ruling in clear, measured language after careful consideration of all submissions. Eric Whitaker was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison on charges of wire fraud and embezzlement, with additional restitution ordered for affected parties and clients impacted by the diverted funds. The court also imposed a permanent ban on his real estate developer license in the state of Washington and authorized the seizure of specific assets traced directly to the improper transactions, including certain properties and accounts that had been commingled with legitimate holdings. The decision included immediate steps for asset division. ensuring that joint properties and accounts would be handled according to the documented evidence rather than any prior informal arrangements or claims. Eric's reaction remained controlled in the moment, though the finality of the sentencing visibly affected him as the judge concluded the proceedings and outlined the timeline for reporting to the designated facility. His attorney requested a brief stay for appeal preparation, which was granted under standard conditions, but the court orders took effect without delay, marking a clear break from the previous controlling dynamics. In the days that followed, the divorce process moved forward efficiently through the family court system. Whitney Morgan handled the paperwork with precision, ensuring that all financial disclosures aligned with the federal findings and that no hidden accounts remained unaddressed. The final decree granted me full control over the remaining legitimate assets, free from any ongoing claims or obligations tied to Eric's actions. The separation was complete and final, with no provisions for reconciliation, continued contact, or shared responsibilities beyond what the law required for administrative matters. The marriage that had lasted 12 years ended cleanly through legal channels. With the legal proceedings behind me, I focused on establishing the Phoenix Support Foundation here in Seattle, a nonprofit dedicated to assisting women navigating similar situations involving financial manipulation and controlling relationships. The foundation started small, operating from a modest office near Capitol Hill and partnering with local legal aid organizations and counselors to provide resources for proper documentation, safety planning, and practical guidance on rebuilding independence. The name reflected the idea of rising from difficult circumstances through preparation and support rather than confrontation or immediate reaction. Tyler continued to offer steady friendship in the background, helping with initial setup tasks such as secure record-keeping systems and connecting me with tech professionals who assisted with the foundation's basic infrastructure. Whitney and Jordan provided occasional advice on structural matters, ensuring the organization operated within clear legal boundaries from the start and maintained proper financial transparency. The work brought a sense of purpose that extended beyond my personal experience, turning the lessons from the past 12 years into something constructive for others facing comparable challenges in the Seattle community. Looking back on the entire process, the most valuable realization was the power of patience combined with methodical preparation. Rather than reacting in the heat of difficult moments, the quiet collection of evidence and coordination with trusted professionals created a foundation strong enough to withstand scrutiny in both federal and family court. The outcome demonstrated that legal systems in the United States, when presented with thorough documentation, forensic analysis, and corroborating testimony from multiple sources, can deliver accountable results even in complex personal and financial matters that span many years. Eric began serving his sentence at a federal facility outside the state, while the seized assets were distributed according to the court orders in the divorce decree. The life we had shared for 12 years ended cleanly, without lingering ties, negotiations, or opportunities for reconciliation. The foundation continues to grow slowly but steadily, serving as a practical reminder that careful planning and professional support can help reclaim stability and independence after periods of control and deception. This chapter closed with clear boundaries and a forward direction grounded in real outcomes rather than unresolved emotions or partial compromises. The experience reinforced that true resolution comes from addressing facts through established legal channels, allowing individuals to move ahead with independence and renewed purpose in a city like Seattle where new beginnings remain possible even after significant upheaval.